Happy Tuesday, NCAA basketball fans. This is your weekly Trogcast, two really old guys talking NCAA basketball. Jeff Zink on this end, Jim Reaker on that end. Jim, how we doing?
Oh, it's we're getting there. February furiness. Is that a word? It is now.
Ferocity, I believe, would be the word. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I like that even better. The games get more and more important and more exciting. For example, last night I watched Baylor and Texas, 8-9 in the Big 12, but it went down to the wire double overtime because somebody with cybermetrics or whatever said that whoever won that game had a 40% better chance of making the NCAA tournament. So the announcers played it up that it was almost like a play-in game, and obviously both teams got the memo because neither team wanted to lose, and it felt like a March game.
Mm-hmm. Well, you bring up a good point there. I don't think any of the teams ever want to lose, so yeah, but it was an exciting game. But we're in the middle of another wacky week. Last week, 6 of the top 10 teams lost, including number 1, number 2, and number 3. 15 of the top 25 teams lose, but there's hardly any shuffle in the top 25. Ohio State moves into the top 10, and Clemson and UNC come back into the top 15. And with, just 3 weeks until the end of the regular season, so many conferences, it seems that we don't know much more in a lot of these big conferences than we did in the preseason.
Yeah, and you talk about wacky. Let me lay this out for you for a second here and get your take on this. The number 2 team in the country lost at home to a middle-of-the-pack team in their league, although a rival, and moved up to number 1 after the number 1 team lost at home to the last-place team of their conference. That has never happened before, I'm sure. I wonder if it's ever happened. Didn't do the research. A team lost the day before the poll came out or 2 days before the poll came out and moved to number 1. That could have never happened before. But as you say, it's a wacky year.
It's not really a wacky year. Here's my quick take on last week. It doesn't mean anything. It's just the season playing itself out. These last 3 weeks will happen. The pollsters pretty much lock into teams, and I think they wanted to name Virginia number 1, and you hit on something. They lost at home to an in-state rival in overtime by 1. Not that big a thing. Purdue, who they dropped from number 3 to number 6, lost twice on last-second shots to big rivals. The big surprise, as we talked about last week on our Razorcast, was Nova losing to St. John's, but you said all year, top to bottom, anything can happen in the Big East. We're just in that part of the season where anything's going on, and it doesn't matter, but you hit on something when you're talking about with the Oklahoma-Texas game. You got the teams now that are pretty much set. And they're fighting for the conference titles, but it's the tournament that gets you in the NCAA tournament, and it's the other teams that are scrambling, like the teams you watched last night and a Virginia Tech and all that. So I think on that note, it's knocking off the top dog, and it means a little bit more to those mid-level teams because it makes a bigger difference in their season.
Yeah, you're probably right there that a lot of the, games that will be fought tooth and nail are in the middle of the pack, or, again, a team who's on the bubble, as we talk about all the time when we get closer to March, knows that win over one of the top teams in their league will bring them more attention, or that we hear all the time, signature win on their resume. And so you're probably right there that those teams in the middle or on the bubble have a little bit more to play for, and things are, a little more immediate for them rather than the teams that, we're sitting at those 16 teams that were revealed on Sunday. It's almost impossible that any one of those will not be part of the show. Just give you example, case in point, Xavier last year, who had lost, 6 in a row before they won a couple big ones at the end, beat Butler, won 2 games in the Big East tournament, and made it in to the tournament. And again, another case in point, if you make it in, you might be able to make a run if you get hot and start playing well at the right time.
Well, you hit on it there, the top 16, and it's something I know that you watch. It's that time of year, and it gives people something to talk about. But now they're coming out with the early rankings, the seedings. Virginia was not only number 1 in the country, but in the early NCAA setup, the pundits have put them as the number 1 overall seed. And I know this is something you watch about, and you've already hinted. I don't give too flaps in the wind about. But what do you think about what they're kind of? You just mentioned that the top 16 are probably in. But were there any surprises in that 16 from what you saw?
Well, here's the 2 teams that a lot of people talked about. I've listened to a couple of shows that just, again, why was this done? For that very reason, to have shows people talk about it, sell advertisement, and make money. It's all about money. But the 2 that come up the most, they're kind of interesting because they've created this new system, and I'm not real clear. I have a basic understanding of it. The quadrants, they have the 4 quadrants, and how many quadrant 1 wins and 2 wins, and basically it comes down to the thing that's different is wins on the road are very important now. And the team that really gets hammered and actually was on the 3 line, I think they were ranked number 9 or 10, was Michigan State, who is ranked by the AP and the coaches poll in the top 4. I think, what are they, 2 maybe? But they're a 3rd seed right now because they have no major wins on the road. In fact, they lost to Ohio State on the road. And the other one is Oklahoma. A lot of people said they shouldn't even be in the top 16. They've lost 6 of their last 8 games. But when you look at those quadrants that they've set up, that they have a lot of big wins on the road. And so those are the 2 that maybe a lot of people question. But everything else is probably where it should be.
And like I say, people look at it, it's something to talk about. It's a month early. They're going to come out with these rankings the second weekend in March. It does give people something to talk about, but there is a month of basketball to play. And in particular, we'll talk about this coming up. It does die down. There's 8 top 25 matchups this week, and then there's a couple against teams that used to be in the top 25. So I think this is going to be a big week. Well, there's only 2, according to this week's rankings, because that can change. But the 2 weeks after that, there's only 2. So a lot of shuffling can happen, a lot of those teams coming back up. But to bring it out, it is coming down to tournament time, and people are not only looking to set up their position for the NCAA tournament, but there's a lot of things that have to happen before that, and one of them are all the conference tournaments, which could shuffle this all anyway. And that's what teams are playing for when you look at it and you look at their schedules. You mentioned it in our Trog cast the other week. The danger right now of a team like St. John's, which was 0 for 2018 and has pulled out 3 straight very good wins. And right now, Xavier may end up playing them in an early game and makes them dangerous. And those are the sorts of things that are going to make a big statement on that 16 or even the 68 moving forward.
And I found this interesting point that I started looking at through all the conferences, the 6 that we cover, and the important games coming up. And an interesting point I come across is the 2 leagues that only have 10 teams that play the complete round robin, 18 games, play everybody twice. They have very, very important games in the next 2 weeks where they're playing each other, those top teams. For example, Villanova and Xavier are playing later this week, and Seton Hall and Xavier are playing. Seton Hall is about 4th or 5th. In the Big 12, you have Kansas and Oklahoma, Kansas and West Virginia, the teams up at the top playing each other. But if you look at the ACC, which has 15 teams, the SEC that has 14 teams, the Big 10 that has 14 teams, in those conferences, of the top 3 or 4, none of them are playing each other. Yeah. So here's what I'm going to tell what NCAA basketball should do. I added up the Power 6. There are 75 teams in the Power 6. You pick up another 5 or 15 teams, so you get an even number, 80 or 90 teams. You create 9 10-team leagues, make them more geographical, so West Virginia is not in the Big 12 and Creighton's not in the Big East, and then you'll have much more competitive leagues. But, that's probably not going to happen. You know why?
Money.
I'll give you a
money,
word.
Tradition, AD's brains blowing up. Yeah.
One other word, football. Because, again, remember, it's not all about basketball in these leagues. So, but I don't know.
Well, the other option there, Jim, you bring up on something, the other thing that they could do, and they used to do in some of these, like they do in football, is maybe create two divisions within those big conferences. So you got the ACC, which has got 14 teams, or the Big 10 plus 4, make them 2 7-team divisions, and they have to play each other twice, and then play everybody in the other division once. That's 18 of your games, and that's sort of what happens a lot of times. Except it's not balanced, and it doesn't always create the rivalries. I mean, I don't know how they do it, but UNC and Duke play, twice every year. Now, do they set up one of their non-conference games as that other rivalry game, or does the conference always make that happen? If you had 2 7-team divisions in some of those, it could happen. Because you hit on another thing. Those teams that have, those conferences that have 10 teams in them, they're playing 18 conference games because they play each other twice. So it would still come down to 18 conference games. But it's exciting this way too. But you're right, when you look at some of the games coming up, there isn't as much excitement, and you skipped right over when you talk about the Big 12, a bigger game that comes first because everybody keeps overlooking them, which is Oklahoma has to go to Texas Tech. You mentioned Oklahoma and Kansas and West Virginia and Kansas, and those are the big 3 that people are always talking about. But right now, Texas Tech is the team that's in control of that conference, and they have that big game against Oklahoma. I believe that's tonight.
Yeah, it is tonight.
And they still have to play Kansas and West Virginia. So you're right there. And Xavier has to play Villanova this Saturday. In the AAC, it's not going to be as important, but Cincinnati has to play Wichita State twice. And we're going to talk about that week coming up and all those games in just a little bit. But it would be interesting to see how they could do that. But I go back to the point I brought up earlier. One of the inequities of the NCAA, and we've already talked about it a couple times, is that every conference gets a representative. So when you're looking at, we've made fun of the SWAC, which has,
nobody with a winning record.
Nobody with a winning record, but also the MEAC has, 2 teams with a winning record, and they're 15 and 11 and 14 and 12, and who knows if they're still going to be there when but they're going to get somebody in the NCAA. And of course, that's also where the fun comes with the Cinderella. Somebody's going to break out and make a run, and then they're going to have fun with it. But that's the harder part too, because you don't want the NCAA to be like if so if you had 90 teams in the Big 6. It's ignoring those other ones, and there's still only 68 slots in the NCAA tournament.
And of course, we carry this conversation on any further. Then the next thing is, well, should they expand? And I don't.
How I feel about that.
They should all get a chance, right?
Just put it in like a high school. Everybody, it adds one more weekend to the year, and of course that means, again, rearranging the tradition and going back to that. But one extra weekend would get us down to it. And
some people argue they all do have a chance because that's why the automatic bid comes out of the tournament. and almost everybody, although I think there are a few conferences that if you finish at the very, very bottom, you don't even qualify for the tournament. But again, yeah, we're not talking about many there. So anyway,
let's move on to another topic, and it's that time of year. I labeled it on our outline, coaches with burnt buns. The hot seat has not just warmed up, but it's set on flames. Let's talk about the second one I put on there first, because it was interesting if you watch the press conference. But Andy Kennedy's out at Ole Miss. He's from Mississippi, the winningest coach in their history. He's got, I think, 11, 12, 20-win seasons, but only 2 NCAA berths. Just couldn't get it done in the SEC. Just listen to some of these stats on Andy Kennedy. Only the 5th coach in SEC history with 45 or more wins in his first 2 years. The others are Tubby Smith, Eddie Sutton, Bruce Pearl, John Calipari. He's only the 7th coach in SEC history to guide his team to 20 wins in 4 of his first 5 seasons, as well as the only coach in Ole Miss history to produce 11 consecutive winning seasons. And his coaching tree includes Frank Martin at South Carolina and Mike White at Florida. He's not going to be unemployed long, but if you watch parts of the press conference, they made it come across like this was Andy Kennedy's decision, and that might have been part of the negotiation to go there. But he couldn't get it done in the SEC, but I have to say to the people down in Oxford, good luck finding somebody else that's going to do as well as Andy Kennedy did for you.
Well, you say it was his decision, and from my reading, I think reading through the lines maybe a little bit, but it might have been his decision. But here's the other thing that I think if you step back and look, he's not been successful the last couple years. In fact, I think they're like 5 or 6 games under 500 this year overall. I think this was Andy Kennedy looking in the mirror and saying, I'm burned out. I'm not getting it done. In fact, I believe, wasn't he the one that he was some bonus last year? He's supposed to get $25,000 for something he met that he was supposed to get a bonus, and he returned it to the school because he said he didn't think he deserved it. And you said he won't be out of the coaching ranks for long. I think he's going to be out at least a year or 2. I think this is a guy who said, I got to look at my health. I'm not sure of his family situation, but I think he just thought, I need a break. Big-time college basketball coaching and recruiting and playing in the SEC, I think, has just caught up with him, and he realized he needed a break. So it really might have been his decision. He probably went to the school and said, let's just part ways, and you guys find somebody else. If he's coaching next year, I'll be completely surprised. And he probably will get back in at some point, but I would doubt he would be in at a big-name school. In fact, do you know where he played? That was kind of interesting to me. I thought he played at Mississippi. He did not.
No. You'll tell me here. I remember looking at it yesterday when I was doing
UAB.
Yeah, that's right. He played for
Bartow.
The younger Bartow. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's right.
So I don't know where UAB is these days. What conference are they in? This conference?
These are Conference USA. Yeah.
Okay, and I don't know what their situation, but I could see maybe going back there, a program that's not quite at the level that Ole Miss is. So,
well, the one thing that I would
my take on him,
I would say, probably in the end it was his decision, but I think he was getting pressure. They were probably coming to him, and he might have put the writing on the wall. But last year they were 22-14. This year they're struggling a little bit, and they're going to be under 500. But the previous 3 years, all over 20 wins. But he just couldn't get them to the next round. And I just think a program like Ole Miss, if they were pressuring him and it wasn't his idea, they've got to stop and think about what they're doing. Because this is a guy, he's been under a lot of pressure. The Cincinnati connection, of course, is he had to step into the shoes of Bob Huggins and his ugly separation from the University of Cincinnati, and did a very good job with that team, got 20 wins in his one season, but then the university decided to take another direction. The points you make, too, is a year to me is not long in the college coaching ranks. Yeah, and I think he will go back and rejuvenate and and come back and find ways to contribute, because he's a basketball lifer, and he's still relatively young. He's only 49 years old. So that's and that's going to heat up. You're going to see. We already had Mark Price out in North Carolina, Wilmington, and but the other one is a sadder change in the coaching ranks, and that's Larry Eustace, as well as his assistant Steve Barnes at Colorado State. I mean, he's still technically on administrative leave as they work through this, but it's unlikely that he's going to be back. Basically for abusive actions. And this is a guy who was the National Coach of the Year at Iowa State. He's won everywhere he's coached: Idaho, Utah State, Iowa State, Southern Miss, and now Colorado State. He took the last 4 of those to at least one NCAA tournament. And his overall record right now is 520 and 322, but his methods caught up to him. And this is a guy also who had his problems, had to leave Iowa State because he was caught in compromised photographs with co-eds at a party with booze in his hand. Now, he did go through rehab, and that hasn't been as much of an issue. But it's also, what's sad about this is just, a couple of years ago, they had a internal investigation. In 2014, they recommended his firing due to creating a culture of fear, intimidation by emotionally and verbally abusing his players and staff. But Colorado State kept him, and that report came out just a few days after he was named Mountain West Coach of the Year and got second place when he only had 7 available. So this guy can coach, but it's old school, and even his assistant, who they named Steve Barnes, they named to take his place, they removed him very quickly because the players went to the administration and said, hey, he's worse than Eustace. So this is another case of old methods having to be cleaned out as teams move forward.
Well, and you bring up some important, in fact, I had forgotten about this whole story. Yeah, he was, remember how bizarre it was that these pictures taken, he was at I can't remember where it was, Iowa State. I think it was maybe at Oklahoma, the first. Well, he was at Iowa State, but they were playing Oklahoma, and within an hour after the game they lost at Oklahoma, pictures were taken of him at a sorority party. And then a week later, the same thing at Kansas State. Supposedly he wasn't even riding the charter with the team to these places. He had his own motorhome that he drove around, and I guess it came out then that he had obvious problems with alcohol, and went through treatment there. Again, and he went somewhere between, after he got fired at Iowa State, he went somewhere else and was very successful. Again, here's the issue. This guy can win, and again, we've talked about it before, especially, you go back to Ole Miss. Was there pressure on Andy Kennedy? I'm going to guess, just knowing the SEC and Ole Miss and the South and athletics, that the pressure probably wasn't coming from the administration. It was probably coming from big-time backers and saying, well, why can't you be like UK and win it every year and be in the NCAA year and be in, 4 out of 8 of the Final Fours the last 8 years. So that's probably where the pressure. But again, there's so many red flags with this guy. It seems like he probably still has some personal issues that he needs to deal with. And, he's been very successful. He's been the most successful coach at Colorado State. So, it's one of those sitting there, I'm sure, administration and even backers saying, well, the guy wins. So should we question the way he's doing it? Because he is the most successful coach we've ever had. But you got to get into, especially this day and age, the way people act and treat people, is very, very important.
It is, and you think, what was it? I think it was it the Rutgers coach a couple years ago got suspended for throwing the balls at kids and kicking kids and doing all that, and it is the way. And you were having a conversation with a couple of coaches just the other day about the way it was back when you were playing, but things have changed and expectations are different, and you just can't do that. You want to motivate kids, you want to get them up there, but you can't do it in a culture that that they label emotionally and verbally abusing players and staff. So I have a feeling that maybe some small program in a year or two might give him a chance, but he's 62, so his run just might be over, and that's unfortunate. And again, you hate to see it that. There's not going to be the last one. You've got others that we've already talked about. Coach Ollie might be on the way out at UConn, and he's under NCAA investigation for recruiting. It's just, as you hint with Andy Kennedy, a very, very difficult job to have these days. When I think you're right. I mean, admin may not have been at it. It may have been backers. But he's a guy. There's only 2 coaches at Ole Miss that have ever won an NCAA game, and Andy Kennedy is one of them. So high expectations. Why can't you do it when the other guys are doing it? But we'll see more and more. So we know probably the past couple of years there's been 40 coaching changes in NCAA, 40 to 45, and there'll probably be that many again this year.
Yeah, and I think the reason that whole thing hasn't been decided is because they're trying to negotiate. Because again, he was making $1 million. So again, if he's ready, I'm sure he's. Well, who knows what some of the issues he's had, but he should be well invested that he doesn't have to work. And, you'd hope somebody like that obviously is a great student and teacher of the game will find a place maybe with a little less pressure where he can enjoy himself and still be a contribution to the sport and society.
Well, let's talk about the week coming up. I mentioned there's 8 top 25 matches. I'm just going to run down real quick so people know we're there. In the Big 12, we already mentioned Oklahoma goes to Texas Tech. West Virginia goes to Kansas. Oklahoma then has to go to Kansas as well. That's in the Big 12. In the ACC, Duke goes to Clemson, and Clemson's actually going to be the higher-ranked team this weekend. Wichita State is going to visit Cincinnati on Sunday. Arizona goes to Tempe, and the Sun Devils, that's the 6th one. Villanova and Xavier is coming up on Saturday, our second 3 versus 4 matchup in a week after Purdue and Michigan State. And Ohio State has to go to Michigan. Now, in addition to that, Texas A&M just got back into the top 25, and they have to play a hot Missouri. Kentucky, 3 state losses, they're back out of the top 25, but they've got a chance to get back in by playing at number 10 Auburn. Virginia, who we talked about last week, is finishing that tough stretch. They had to go to Florida to play Florida State and barely got out of there. They weren't able to escape Virginia Tech. Now they've got to go back to Florida and face Miami, which just dropped out of the top 25 again. And in a side note, which isn't all that big, but you've got to throw the mid-majors in, Rhode Island has to head to St. Bonaventure, and they're probably the only team with a slight chance to catch the Rams. The Rams have a 4-game lead in that conference, but St. Bonaventure is one of the ones on their tail, so must win there. So I know the game that you're really going to want to talk about, and we'll talk about more on Thursday, is the Nova-Xavier game. But before we get to that, what are the other games that you're going to be probably staying up late trying to watch this week?
Well, tonight I'm definitely going to watch that Oklahoma-Texas Tech game for the mere fact I haven't watched Texas Tech play very much, so that's one of the reasons I want to watch that. Oklahoma's a dangerous team. Again, I think they're very beatable. I think people have kind of figured out how to beat them, how to control Trae Young, let him have his points, just don't let him have his assist and get the rest of the team involved. He's tried to carry that team on his back, and I just don't think he has a supporting cast. But they are dangerous when he goes off because he's the one that I've seen times when he's about 3 steps over the midcourt line that he'll throw one up and it goes in. So that's going to be an important game. West Virginia at Kansas, and you would almost say, here's the thing, is Kansas going to be able to carry on? They're a game out. You got West Virginia, who I've picked to win that, but you got Texas Tech, who's a game up. You'd say Kansas is going to win that game against West Virginia, except Kansas has lost 3 times in Fog Allen this year already, which just is unbelievable because they usually never lose there. Kentucky-Auburn game is going to be interesting because Kentucky, Cal could lose his 4th straight. I feel so sorry for him.
Sarcasm is noted.
But I will watch that game if I have time, and also because I haven't really seen Auburn play that much because they've kind of come out of the blue with Bruce Pearl this year, although they were one that was kind of rated lower than their record because they haven't played a strong schedule, although I think Bruce Pearl kind of did the non-conference that way because he had a young team trying to get some success, and obviously it's worked because it's carried into the league season. The ACC, I've watched too much of that lately, so I'm probably not going to watch much of that, although I don't know when that Virginia-Miami game is. I might try to catch that. I think Virginia might be in trouble. They are not shooting very well right now. They are a little offensively challenged, and I think they're very beatable. And, again, I think people have realized kind of how to beat them, especially when you got to play defense against them. If you can keep them from scoring, that's how you beat them, as Virginia Tech found out. And, again, I don't know if it was so much Virginia Tech and Buzz Williams' defense. I think Virginia's kind of slumping a little bit. Try to catch UC. I haven't watched UC that much, and I hear these great things about them. I think they got a big challenge going to Houston. Houston's a pretty good team. I think we just knocked off Wichita State themselves. So I think that's going to be a tougher challenge than some of the UC fans. And I think UC is going to, all three of those games, both Wichita State games and Houston. I'm not sold that the Bearcats are as good as some local pundits are giving them because they just haven't played anybody. The two best teams they played, Xavier and Florida, they lost. The Pac-12, ho-hum. I'll leave that to Bill Walton to call it the League of Champions, as he always does, because even Arizona stumbled a little bit, and not sure what's going on out there because they got all kinds of talent, and it rears its head every once in a while, but then they lose games. They lose to UCLA this weekend, was it?
They did. They did.
So, but Arizona State, look at that team that was, number 2 at one point, and the last undefeated team, and now they got into their league, and they've I think they don't even have a winning record. I think they're like 6-7 or something in their league. So I probably, unless I just stumble onto that game, won't watch too much of that. Rhode Island has the Atlantic 10-1. In fact, that's a pretty good team. It's coached by a Hurley, and that's a team you got to watch in the NCAA. They are by far the class of the Atlantic 10. So I'll be watching. Well, first of all, I'm going to watch Xavier play Seton Hall because that's their next most important game. Because if they really want to win this outright, they must beat Seton Hall at home on tomorrow night before they play Villanova on Saturday. And we hope that the Musketeers do win that. And Villanova has a tough game, I think, as it's tomorrow night also. They got to go to Providence. And that's not an easy game, as the Musketeers can tell you, because that's one of their losses on the road at Providence. So, and I know what you're going to say. You want them to both win, so it's a bigger game. I'll take a loss from Villanova anytime because it'll help Xavier hopefully win the Big East, even if they stumble a little bit. So that's kind of what I'm looking at. The Big Ten. Did I talk about the Big Ten? Because there are no big games really in the Big. Which ones? Michigan plays somebody.
Ohio State.
Michigan
plays Ohio State. Yeah.
Oh, here's another game.
That's kind of a big game. Yeah.
Well, here's another game that is big too, and I think it's tonight or tomorrow night. Is Ohio State has to go to Penn State, and Penn State, of course, being the only league loss they had. So I'm sure they're going to have revenge on their mind, but again, it's an away game, and Penn State's a dangerous middle-of-the-road Big Ten team that I'm sure, like we talked about before, is one of those teams that if they can beat Ohio State twice, that will help their resume, and will be 2 signature wins for them. As I'm using all these pundit terms that I hear all the time.
You and Joe Lenardi on the same page. Yeah, but I'd tell you right now, the Buckeyes are going to beat them by 10. They're going to revenge that game, and it was, everything worked right. But yeah, the Michigan game is right there, a big rivalry as well, and it's really about, the only challenge, because as you pointed out several times, the Big Ten is going to stop a little earlier than most of the other conferences to get their conference in. So after that, they've just got Rutgers and Indiana. And not to blow them off, but neither of them should be a challenge to the Buckeyes, but could be. And they're looking to hold on to, and they've got it in their own control. I think the games that we're looking at in this week, like I said, there's 8 top 25 matchups, and those other ones that you ran down and I talked about, whereas in the final 2 weeks there aren't as many. So this is where people got to make hay while the sun shines when it comes to those conference championships. And if Virginia does stumble, I mean, they have to. They're 2.5 games up on Clemson, and Clemson plays Duke this week. So one of those guys is going to lose and either have 4 or 5 losses. So it's a must-win for Clemson, even if Virginia stumbles. And, I talked last week about the Texas swing for Cincinnati, and they took care of SMU handily, and they took care of Houston here in town. But they've got a 3-game lead. So somebody's got to beat them, or those 2 games against Wichita State aren't going to mean as much as you would thought they were. And I'm with you. They haven't played anybody. Those Wichita State games will tell you something. But Wichita State, I don't think, is the team that they've been in the past either. So the AAC, could come out like a house of fire in the NCAA, or they could fall flat on their face. You had the big ones for standings this week, huge for the Big 12. Texas, a game up on Kansas, a game and a half up on Texas Tech, West Virginia, and they're all playing each other with Oklahoma. Playing spoiler, they're now at 6-6 in the league, but they're actually fighting for their NCAA-dom. I mean, they're only at 16-8, so they've got some work to do. I like that you're not looking past Seton Hall because the Muskies have to beat them, but everybody's looking to that game on Saturday. And if Xavier wants to earn that top seed, which they were given this week, along with Villanova, 2 Big East number 1 seeds, they have to beat Villanova and win the Big East. They're not going to give it to them after having lost. They'll be back to a 2 or 3 seed. And I'm with you, too. The Pac-12, one of my conferences, very disappointing, but also when you look at the standings, Arizona's 2 games up, even after that loss to UCLA. And you may remember I said last week it was a must-win for the Bruins in order to try to keep Arizona in check. And, the Sun Devils have almost got to do them, and DeAndre Ayton will try to take them onto his shoulders and fight them through. You talk about a disappointing year for Arizona, but again, they are still 2 games up in what is a depleted Pac-12. So lots of exciting things. All right, Bill. Go and take your tie-dye shirt and bicycle down to the Grateful Dead concert.
Well, here's what's going to be really fun, probably. I mean, even almost like March Madness are these conference tournaments, because you got these real dangerous teams on. For example, supposedly Michael Porter is going to be back with Missouri soon, and they're going to be on the bubble. But can they win the SEC? Kentucky's. I'm looking at their schedule. They're at Auburn, probably a loss. Alabama at home, not going to be easy. At Arkansas, probably a loss. Missouri at home. Maybe Michael Porter's back by February 24th. And they got to go to Florida. They may be on the bubble, and if they don't win a couple games, or maybe even have to win their tournament, they're sitting at 500 in the SEC. And again, another team like UC that really didn't play anybody much except for a couple marquee games early on, but really didn't play a very tough non-league schedule. So they're not, I think they got them at an 8 or 9 seed right now. And if they lose another 4 or 5 games before the end of the season and then going into the tournament, they may not make it. So, and then St. John's, could St. John's run the table in the Big East? Be very, very difficult, because they're probably going to get the last seed, meaning they're going to have to win 4 games on 4 days. And, of course, that's very hard to do, but teams have done it before when they catch fire. And the other advantage, of course, they're going to have is they're going to be playing that tournament on their home floor at the Gardens, Madison Square Garden. I always want to say Market Square Arena. I don't know. Madison Square Garden.
That's in Indianapolis.
The greatest.
It was.
Yeah. It was. It's in our memories now. So those tournaments are going to be great. And then you get into one team I talked about at the very beginning as my kind of sleeper, come from nowhere team, but they're going to have to win, I think, a very tough tournament. And that's the Northern Kentucky Norse. I think they have a game lead over Wright State. That's a big game in our region. I think they play this Sunday, and if NKU can win that, they will have a 2-game lead over the Raiders, and we'll get the number 1 seed. But again, I think there's only one team coming out of the horizon. They got both Wright State and Northern Kentucky that are very, very tough there. And remember, Northern Kentucky won that last year, I think, as a 4 or 5 seed, and got the bid coming out of that league. So it's ramping up. And again, I think those conference tournament weeks, and again, the Big Ten is going to be a week early. That might be a marketing genius move, because it's going to be the only real big tournament played at that time, so it may get more attention. The Big Ten may pat itself on the back. The reason they did it, of course, was so they could play at Madison Square Garden, but it might be my only concern would be, and maybe, I don't know, do you want time off or do you want to keep playing? We've seen these teams like Xavier had a week off, and they got another one coming up pretty soon, and didn't seem to play that well coming out of it. And Marquette, remember, they had a 9-day layoff before they played Xavier. And I don't know what is time off good, or do you want to keep playing? It's probably depends.
Well, that's a topic for the weeks to come. And welcome to the Jim Reaker Fishing Show. You threw enough hooks in the line there and bait to see what's going on. I'm going to let them play the games. A lot of great games coming up. And, yeah, there's a lot of what-ifs on the planet there, but we'll know more in a week, and we'll know more in 2 weeks. And then we'll be talking about the tournaments where everything gets wiped clean. And so it could be interesting, but it gives a lot of people something to talk about. And I hope that some of your good friends or Kentucky fans weren't listening to you piling on them there, because you might get a little grief the next time you see them.
It's a reality.
Yeah. All right, let's head on to the trivia and tidbits portion of the show. What have you got for me this week?
Well, we're talking about the Virginia Cavaliers, Wahoos, number 1 in the country. First time since Ralph Sampson was there that they have been ranked number 1. Of course, their coach is Tony Bennett, and not of the singing variety, of course. Mm-hmm. So the question is about him today. Do you know where Tony Bennett played in his playing career, collegiate playing career?
That's a good one.
Hello.
I'm there. I'm here.
Have we been cut off? Oh.
No. You come up with these. It's not. I know he didn't go to a big program, because they've talked about that, how he worked his way up in the through the coaching ranks, and like a lot of guys, they don't do it. So you have me totally. I know it's not a big program. That's the only thing I can really throw at you.
You are correct there, and I didn't make this connection. He played for his father, Dick Bennett, at Wisconsin Green Bay.
Oh, so there it is.
Now, to all this connection is just unbelievable. So he played for his dad there. Actually, Wisconsin, they made the NCAA tournament, I think 2 of his 4 years there, which were probably the first 2 times they had ever been there. Then he joined his father. We all remember Dick Bennett being at Wisconsin and playing, and you've heard the pack line defense, which Virginia still plays. A few other teams play it. Actually, Xavier plays a form of it. But Dick Bennett actually is the creator and designer of the pack line defense, because Tony joined him at Wisconsin. He was an assistant under his father at Wisconsin for a few years. He then followed his father to Washington State. I had forgotten Dick Bennett left Wisconsin. It was, of course, replaced by one of his assistants, Bo Ryan, who they continued that defense and, of course, continue it today under Gary Gard. But they went to Washington State. He was an assistant out there. And actually, when his father retired, he took over the Washington State program and was successful there. And, of course, from there he went to Virginia. So that defense is the defense that was created by his father, the one that's bringing them so much success at Virginia this year. So just kind of like one of those, I was researching it, and I go, oh, yeah, okay. Oh, it all makes sense.
Great family coaching trees like the Drews. And
actually, and you bring that up, another important thing, he has a sister, I think her name was Christy, who actually coached at IU, the women's program at IU. And somewhere else, and she's been a very successful. So yeah, it's a coaching family. So that's my trivia. Always trying to educate you and the listeners a little bit, Jeff, about college basketball.
You're a font of wisdom, There's just no doubt about it.
No, I'm a Google master.
You're a Google master, which turns you into a font of wisdom. Okay, that's what every 5-year-old can't necessarily do what you do. All right, that leaves it. Thank you all for listening. This is the Trogcast. Join us on Thursday for our weekly Razorcast, all things Muskie basketball for Xavier University. And, of course, we'll be talking a lot. We'll have that Seton Hall game under our belts, and the big game on Saturday will be a big topic of conversation this Thursday.
Well, I'm looking forward to Thursday. Right off that, hopefully we'll win over Seton Hall Wednesday night. Late game, 9 o'clock. Man, I probably will not have been to bed by the time we cue it up at 10 o'clock on Thursday morning, but we'll have plenty to talk about.
But you'll have your bobblehead, which is what that's going to get.
I hope I'll have my bobblehead.
You'll have your Barry Larkin, Joe Sunderman bobblehead.
I hope.
For the tidbits when we end, and this is a question to me, like I said, the Winter Olympics have now started, and this is something I've always not understood is why basketball is not in the Winter Olympics. It's in the Summer Olympics. We all know why. It's because they play in the winter and they can't get them loose. But a sport that was invented specifically, that you don't have to play on. You don't play on ice. It's February, and I don't play on ice here. Come on. Don't be silly. Because I can't get the people
but most
use.
of the sports have something to do with snow or ice in the Winter Olympics.
If you could let me finish the sentence, it's a sport that was invented to keep kids busy during the winter. We already covered that on an earlier program. But, of course, again, they know it's not because it's on ice or it's on a mountain or it's under snow. It's just played in the winter. But all those guys, the NBAers and the NCAAers, they're playing there, so they've moved it to the summer team. But that led me to leave. Just a quick thing. I started to look at, first just people who had won an NCAA title and an Olympic gold medal. That's, quite a list. So then narrowed it down to the guys who won an NCAA title, an NBA title, and an Olympic gold medal as players. I'll run through them real quick, but how many do you think there are?
Gold medal, NCAA, NBA championship, 5.
You're close. There's 7. They used to call it the Mount Rushmore. There were 4 for a long time. Then they came up. But those 5 are in order: Clyde Levelette, who was an Olympic champion in 52, NCAA champion with the Kansas in 52, and 3-time NBA champion. He was followed by teammates K.C. Jones and Bill Russell, both with the San Francisco Dons in 55 and 56, their back-to-back years. And then they were on the 56 team in Melbourne, which blew everybody away. They won by like an average of over 50 points a game. And they, of course, were on some of those great Boston Celtics teams. The 4th one was Jerry Lucas, who was part of the Ohio State Buckeyes when they won in 1960 and then went on to win 1960 championship and won his one NBA championship with the New York Knicks. And then the 4th that did it the 5th that did it as a collegian was Michael Jordan, who was an Olympic champion in 84 after his NCAA championship in 82 at North Carolina. And then the multiple NBA champions. Of course, he went back with the Dream Team in 1992 to win his 2nd gold medal. And the other collegian that did it was Quinn Buckner in 76 in Montreal with the U.S. gold medal team after winning the championship with Indiana, and was an NBA champion in Boston in 84. And the last one was Magic Johnson, who came back to be part of that Dream Team, of course, won with Michigan State in 79 and multiple NBA championships with the Los Angeles Lakers. But also, this is led me to the other thing, is maybe to narrow down coaches that have won an NCAA title and an Olympic gold. How many of those are there?
3.
Actually, 8. 5 on the guys' side and 3 on the women's side. So you were right on the women's side. Coach K, who's obviously won at Duke multiple times, and he's a 3-time gold medal winner at Beijing, London, and Rio. Bobby Knight, 3 championships in Indiana and the 84 games in L.A. Dean Smith, who won twice at North Carolina and was the head coach in Montreal in 76. Hank Eba, who won twice at Oklahoma A&M, which is now Oklahoma State, and he's He won twice in 64 in Tokyo, 68 in Mexico City. Of course, he was the coach during that controversial final game in Munich in 72, where the players still have not accepted their silver medals. If you want to watch about that, watch one of those great 30 for 30s. It's about that. And Pete Newell, the great Cal coach, won at Cal, and also the 60 in a row. And the three gals coaches, Gino Uriyama, obviously multiple NCAA titles with UConn, and he was the gold medal coach in Rio and in London. And Tara Vanderveer from Stanford, two-time NCAA champ, she was the coach in Atlanta in 96. And the great Pat Summitt, who won with numerous Tennessee titles, and she was the coach in L.A. in 84. So that's it. I know I'll never win that since it is a winter sport, but there's lots of things that go on that.
And so there's never been a coach to win NCAA, NBA, and Olympic.
No. There's only been one coach to win NCAA and NBA.
Ooh. And that would be?
Won his NBA in Detroit.
Larry Brown.
There it is. Larry won his NCAA in Kansas. With,
that one's probably not going to happen. Of course, it's easier now because the NBA players can play in the Olympics. It used to be you almost had to graduate near, because it was usually seniors who had graduated that played the next summer, because once you became an NBA player, you couldn't play until about 84 they changed that. So
92.
It made it a little bit easier.
92
okay.
When that was the dream team where they let the pros come in. But lots of fun things there, and we'll have more fun things on Thursday with our Razorcast, and we'll be back on Tuesday with our next Trogcast.